one of the biggest troubles we run into outside of statistics and machine learning and AI in just human civilization is when you look at, I was born in the Soviet Union, and the history of the 20th century, we ran into the most trouble, us humans, when there was a certainty about the objective. And you do whatever it takes to achieve that objective, whether you're talking about Germany or communist Russia. You get into trouble with humans.
I would say with corporations. In fact, some people argue that we don't have to look forward to a time when AI systems take over the world. They already have, and they're called corporations, right? That corporations happen to be using people as components right now, but they are effectively algorithmic machines, and they're optimizing an objective, which is quarterly profit, that isn't aligned with overall well-being of the human race, and they are destroying the world. I mean, they are primarily responsible for our inability to tackle climate change.
Right.
So I think that's one way of thinking about what's going on with corporations. But I think the point you're making is valid, that there are many systems in the real world where we've sort of prematurely fixed on the objective and then decoupled the machine from those that it's supposed to be serving. And I think you see this with government. Right, government is supposed to be a machine that serves people, but instead it tends to be taken over by people who have their own objective and use government to optimize that objective, regardless of what people want.
Do you find appealing the idea of almost arguing machines, where you have multiple AI systems with a clear fixed objective? We have in government the red team and the blue team that are very fixed on their objectives, and they argue, and they kind of many would disagree, but it kind of seems to make it work somewhat. That the duality of it. I know a lot of would disagree. Okay, let's go 100 years back when there still was going on, or at the founding of this country, there was disagreements, and that disagreement is where. So it was a balance between certainty and forced humility because the power was distributed.
Yeah, I think that the nature of debate and disagreement and argument takes as a premise the idea that you could be wrong, right? Which means that you're not necessarily absolutely convinced that your objective is the correct one, right? If you were absolutely convinced, there'd be no point in having any discussion or argument, because you would never change your mind, and there wouldn't be any sort of synthesis or anything like that. So I think you can think of argumentation as an implementation of a form of uncertain reasoning, and I've been reading recently about utilitarianism and the history of efforts to define in a sort of clear mathematical way if you like, a formula for moral or political decision making. And it's really interesting that the parallels between the philosophical discussions going back 200 years and what you see now in discussions about existential risk, because it's almost exactly the same. So someone would say, okay, well, here's a formula for how we should make decisions, right? So utilitarianism is roughly, each person has a utility function, and then we make decisions to maximize the sum of everybody's utility, right? And then people point out, well, in that case, the best policy is one that leads to the enormously vast population, all of whom are living a life that's barely worth living, right? And this is called the repugnant conclusion. And, another version is, that we should maximize pleasure, and that's what we mean by utility. And then you'll get people effectively saying, well, in that case, we might as well just have everyone hooked up to a heroin drip, and they didn't use those words, but that debate, was happening in the 19th century as it is now about AI, that if we get the formula wrong, we're going to have AI systems working towards an outcome that, in retrospect, would be exactly wrong.